So that's cooking now. So now both of these buttons actually call the exact same function. So it doesn't matter which of these I click. So I'll go ahead and click on this dude. It shows the second screen, and then we see it stop here after that screen appeared. Make sense? All right, so those are just kind of various options we have to get us from one screen to another while having the ability to do a little something extra before we get to that next screen. You know, so for example, you're going to have to use one of those two mechanisms when you are writing your version of this, where you are choosing your, they're going to choose which strategy they're going to go for. You're going to pass that strategy or that ordered list of strategies to the second screen, so it has access to that for it to present the various options and that kind of stuff. Make sense? All right, so you got a little bit more to do than just show the next screen. You also, that next screen needs to have some access to some of the decisions you made earlier in the app.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's go and look at the collection view controller and see how that guy works. All right, so we'll go into My Collections CVC. Now up top here, we have this variable called Reuse Identifier, and it's defaulted to the word cell. Now, what's interesting here is you can use this default means for doing this. It's not going to hurt anything, but this actually looks a little bit different than table view controllers look, and I'll point that out here in a second. We'll leave it as the default for right now. But when I write these, I usually dump this line, I dump this line, and then I move that logic down below. See down here inside of our cell for item and index path, I'll talk about that in a second, but that's where that reuse identifier actually gets used. I usually just move it right down there because when we do that, it matches kind of identically to how table view controllers work. So then you can just apply that direct, I mean, you can apply the skill set directly anyways, but now they're almost completely identical. All right, so just for a moment, because we have this reuse identifier, the whole purpose of this guy is, you might have, let's say, a collection view that has 500 things on it. All right, let's say it's 500 pictures, something like that. Well, realistically, how many of those 500 things are you going to see on the screen at once? 5 or 6 or 10, some subset of the 500. Well, it wouldn't make sense for all 500 of those cells to exist all at once, taking up system memory, making your app sluggish, all sorts of things like that. Instead, what makes the most sense is for you, maybe if your app can show 10 cells at once, let's say, maybe you have 14 cells in existence, just the couple of cells right before and the couple of cells right after, so that when the user scrolls, you're using the computation power of the device to go ahead and grab cells that are going off the screen, reuse them by changing the picture on them, and now they appear in the bottom of the screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a performance thing. Android does the exact same thing. So these are reusable cell identifiers. So I'm going to copy that cell identifier. You can put whatever you want in here. I usually just call it cell, but every now and then you might have a collection view or a table view that uses 2 or 3 different kinds of cells. Depending on what information you're showing on the screen, row 0 might be of type cell 1, row 1 might be of type cell 2. So you might need to differentiate between your cells. But, you can call it, my favorite cell 8. You can name it whatever you want. It's just a string. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We're going to go back out to our storyboard here. And I'll click on my collection view, but specifically I want to click on the cell here. And sometimes the cell is a little bit hard to directly click on. You can't quite get it highlighted. So what you can do is you can go over here to the left-hand side, click on the collection view and expand that, and then he'll let you grab the cell. So you can get, you can click on it from here if you have issues grabbing over here. And then what you want to do is you go into the attribute inspector, this guy that looks kind of like a shield here in the middle. And up top, it has the reuse identifier. So that's where you want to paste that word. So whatever word you chose over in your other screen, you want this guy to match. Okay? Now, I've already connected this dude up to my collection CVC, and something that kind of automatically happened for me when I click on the outlets here, notice up top, or I guess it's down here now, it used to be higher up, we have referencing outlets, and there's two things that are automatically, these are things called IB outlets. So IB actions are actions for handling events associated with what's happening on the screen. IB outlets are like variables associated with our screen. And there's two variables that are provided for us for all collection view controllers. One of them is called a data source. One of them is called a delegate. So let's throw this into our slides here because this is another kind of common thing. Let me throw the UI in front of that guy. So this is a UICollectionViewController, but really this concept of a data source and a delegate is associated with many different objects inside. So this is the same lesson here is going to apply to UI table view controllers. It'll apply to UI date controllers, you know, all sorts of things like that. So we have two things. We have a data source and we have a delegate. Now, the data source, this guy represents who is responsible for providing me with, that's not how you spell providing, the data I am supposed to show. That's what the data source's purpose is. The delegate's purpose is who is responsible for responding to various events that occur when the user touches things. So scrolling through, clicking on a cell, that kind of stuff. All right, so the delegate is who handles what happens. The data source is who handles what's there. Usually the data source and the delegate are the same guy, but they do not have to be. Okay? So at the high level, you kind of understand what those two dudes are? All right. So we'll come back in here. So when I click on my collection view controller guy here, notice that we have these two referencing outlets here. Even though we didn't write those, and even though we don't necessarily see those in here, we don't see them in here, believe me, they came with the UI collection view controller. Okay, they hitched a ride with that guy. All right, so those two dudes are provided, and I'll go ahead and disconnect them here, even though it connected them up for us. So, you know, by default here, we see up, let's see where they at now. Why is... Well, that's interesting. They won't let you disconnect it anymore. Well, that's interesting. They don't want you to disconnect it anymore. That's okay. So I won't disconnect it. Okay. But the point is that both of these guys are connected to this. Oh, yeah, you can disconnect it. I was clicking on the wrong thing. There we go. So disconnected from there. Now I'm going to click on the collection view. It's the collection view itself that has the data source and the delegate. Okay. This collection view is the dude who actually shows crap on the screen. He's the dude that will handle clicks and stuff as well. So we need to hook up who is responsible for his data and who is responsible for his delegate. Now, most of the time, it will be the controller that's controlling this dude, right? It doesn't have to be, but most of the time it will be. So the controller that controls this dude is this little yellow circle here. You can also get to it over here. Okay, those are the same thing. So we would drag this data source to the circle here and say that my collection CVC is the data source for this controller, or for this collection view. And the same dude is the delegate for that guy. All right? which means that the dude who handles the data that's going to show up in here, as well as the dude who handles the what happens when things are clicked on, is going to be this dude. And we already have some functions provided for us. So here is collection view data source stuff that's provided for us in here because we chose this dude to be a child of UICollectionViewController, which is a child of UIViewController. All right. So a couple of things we need to provide is how many sections are in this collection view and how many rows are in each section. So you can actually, whether it's a collection view or a table view, you can have multiple sections in it. So for instance, let's say you had a table view where you were going to have, well, actually, collection view might make sense for this. Let's say you were going to do a collection view that showed the flags of all the countries in the world with their separated by their states. So for instance, the United States has 50, has 50 states. So you have the country United States would be a section. Another example of a state would be India. So the country India also has states within it. Canada also has states within it. Each of their they're actually called territories, but whatever. They have breakdowns of, so each one of those might have flags. So you might have a list of, you might have a section for each country in the world, and then within that section you might have a different number of cells depending on how many states, how many unique flags are associated with that country. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. Well, most of the time, though, when we're dealing with collection view stuff, we're not dealing with multiple sections. So a majority of the time, number of sections in the collection view will be 1. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, since we don't have actually any data we're really providing here, I'm going to say we're going to show 500 cells. Okay? So we actually have 500 things in our data set. Usually what this thing would be, instead of being a hard-coded number, it would probably be like, some array. It would be like the size of the array, or the count. In Swift, it's the count. So the number of elements that lives in the array. All right? So this next thing, so this is the third piece to the data source. So the data source has to have a number of sections. It has to have a number of rows in each of those sections. So notice that one of the values that gets passed in here is the section. So if you have multiple sections, you might ask the question, if section is equal to 0, let's say that was the United States, return 50. If section is equal to 1, maybe that's India. I'm not sure how many states are in there. Let's say it's 28. You'll return 28. So you'll have to do some conditionals to make sure you're returning the right value. But for us, we have 1 section, and I'm just arbitrarily going to return 500 for this guy, because that's what he is supposed to return here, an int. And then this guy down here, this cell for item and index path, he gets called once for each cell in each section. All right? And he's using this variable reuse identifier, which if you remember from up top here is called cell. That's why I like putting cell right here, so I don't have to bounce back and forth. But remember, we went and clicked on the cell out in our storyboard and let him know about his reuse identifier. That's what connected him to this code. So if you ever get a weird crash when you use a collection view or a table view and you're not sure what you did wrong, more often than not, you may have forgotten to let your storyboard cell know about the his reuse identifier name. So kind of keep that in mind, because that's a common beginner mistake when you're first using collection views. All right, so this is going to first grab the cell, and notice that he's dequeuing a reusable cell. So this is the whole performance thing. So we're saying, look, give me a cell. I don't care which cell, just give me one that's not currently being used, and let me modify it. All right, so here's the cell right here. And what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and, if it's a even number cell, let's make it red. If it's an odd number cell, let's make it blue. Just change the color of it. All right. So we know which cell it's asking for through this variable right here called index path. So index path is actually a structure that keeps track of 2 pieces of information: what section and what row. Now we happen to know, since we only have 1 section in our project here, that the index path section will always be 0 in this case. So we know we're only dealing with the rows. So I'll say if index path dot row, so that's which row is this? Is this row 0 or row 1 or row 2 or row 3? And actually it's not row, isn't it? No, it's row. Yeah, it's row. If index path dot row mod 2 is equal to 0, that means it's an even row. And we're in this case, so row is kind of left over from table views. In this case, it's just which cell number, because you actually will have several cells in what we visualize as being the first row, but the first several cells will be row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3, even though they appear to all be on the same row. So if it's an even number row, we'll go ahead and set the cell's background color. And this guy's going to be equal to a UI color. So we'll set it to UI color dot red color. Else, cell dot background color is equal to UI color dot blue. All right, so that should alternate between those, and then we ultimately return the cell. So this guy gets called once for each cell in each section, so this guy's going to get called for each of our cells, but it's only going to get called for a cell when it actually needs to appear on the screen. All right, so because initially, so let's say we can fit, I'm just going to guesstimate, let's say we can fit like 25 cells on the screen based on the size of my current cell. It'll call this guy 25 times, even though I have 500 total cells. And then as soon as I start scrolling, he's going to be calling this more and asking which cell am I supposed to produce this time. Okay? So let's go ahead and run this dude. And we'll click on our button, and there's our collection view. And as we scroll through it, we see that these guys are all, you know, different colors, right? And obviously you can write more logic to make them other colors. Now, the reality is that you probably want them to be more than just colors. you kind of want to have maybe labels on them or something that you can put some text. So let's use our last several minutes to kind of show you how that's pulled off, because very, very, very rarely are you going to use the default cell like we're using right now. Usually you want to have a custom cell. All right, so the idea here is going to be, now having said that, there is a thing, cell dot, I think it's image. Doesn't it have an image? Well, maybe it doesn't. Well, you can certainly create an image and then add it as a subview, but whatever. So what I'll do here is we're going to go out here, and I'll make my cell a little bit bigger here. So I'll make it what looks like half the screen. You do need to be a little careful of this, though. Later on, if it becomes an issue, I can show you. We can create a custom flow layout. Because you have to consider that this collection view is going to be shown on various screen sizes as people are using different size iPhones. So sometimes you'll be able to fit 3 things across, sometimes you'll be able to fit 2 things across, so on and so forth, right? And the thing automatically lays itself out because it uses something called Flowlayout. Well, if you really, really, really want it to always be 3 items per row, then what you need to do is you need to dynamically change the size of the cell. Based on what the size of your screen. So with that in mind, you can create a custom layout, and it's not horrible or anything, but it is a little bit of a tedious thing. So let's not burn that bridge yet. Let's look at custom cells first. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw a label out here. All right. And so this might be something that we want to put some custom text on, right? Now, in order to access this label, we're going to need to have this guy be an IB outlet somewhere. All right. We need to have programmatic access to this widget that we see on the screen. Now, he lives within a cell. Now, right now, if we go to the identity inspector, we see that this cell is the generic UI collection view cell. Well, in all the past situations, whenever we needed something to be more than generic, we had to create a code behind, a controller for that guy. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is we're going to right-click. We're going to create a new file. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class. And this guy is going to be, I'm going to use the drop down here, he's going to be a UI collection view cell. All right, and I'll call this guy my custom cell. All right, and we'll create that. Now, the only thing special about this guy is that he holds a label. You know, when I say custom, this is like ghetto version custom. All right, so all he's going to do is hold a label. Now, since I don't have anything to copy from right now, I'm going to go ahead and create my outlet. So this guy's called my collection view cell, so I'll copy that word. That's the name of the class. I'll go ahead and let my cell, this guy, here's my cell, I'll let him know that he's no longer a generic UI collection view cell. He's now a very specific type of collection view cell. Okay? Now, his reuse identifier is still cell. I don't need to change that. All right? But what I do need to do here is I do need to connect this outlet to that cell. So, let's see. How am I going to accomplish that? I need to do control click there. Is that going to take me to the right place? No. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this little two-circle thing. And when you're dealing with cells, it almost always takes you to the wrong place. So this shows code next to your design. So I'm going to change my class here. So instead of automatic, I'm going to go to manual, go to the app, and here's my custom cell. All right. And what I want to do is I want to drag an outlet in here. So I'm going to control click on my label. Come on. I got the new MacBook Pro and the weird, okay, so click. There we go. Oh, come on. There we go. Nailed it. So click and drag in there. I'm creating an outlet. And I'm going to name this guy the label. Okay, and he's going to be of type UI label. So go ahead and connect that. Most of the time what I do, once I have one of these, I actually just cut and paste it from here and then reconnect the stuff up like we did earlier. You hook it up just like you do IB outlets. So I just connected the dots there, and just to show you what I'm talking about, let's pretend like I had cut and paste that guy instead of do what I just did. If I click on my cell here, here's the label that's hooked up. If I disconnect that, I see this outlet will appear there because that guy was labeled as an IB outlet in the code. I can then just click and drag it over to the label I want him to be linked to. That feels easier to me than clicking the little two-circle thing and dragging things between code. So once I have one IB outlet written in code, I usually do cut and paste stuff. All right. Now the punchline is that now I have programmatic access to that label. So now as long as I let my, let's go into our collection view controller. As long as I let this guy know that this is no longer a generic UI collection view cell, he is actually my custom cell. I can now do something. I can talk to that label. I can say, let me build real quick because sometimes the label won't be available to the autocomplete until after you do a build. So I can say something like cell.thelabel.text is equal to blah. And maybe this other side is cell dot the label dot text is equal to woot. All right, so now instead of changing background color, because I'm dealing with a custom label that happens to have a custom cell which happens to have a label in it, I can now set that label to different words. Go ahead and run that. And, you know, I happen to just put one label in there, but you can put 5 labels in there. You can put pictures. You can put whatever you want inside of each of those cells. Row. Oh, hold on. It's this guy. So I do need to, well, no. UI collection view cell. My custom cell is a UI collection view cell, and I let that guy know that he was a my custom cell. And his reuse identifier is cell. Okay. Let's run it one more time in case that was a weird hiccup. Otherwise, I think it is that those 2 things that I say I usually change. So I'll just change them real quick just so you have it on the video. Yep, must be that. So it has to be that initial registration thing that happens. So up here at the top of our collection view controller, this is what I usually do. I take the word cell out of this, just store that string. I delete this line so I'm not dealing with a global variable, although that's not the problem. The problem is this line right here. When it's registering the cell class, because that is no longer, we're not using a generic cell. We're using see this UI collection view cell, that self. We're not registering that anymore. Now we're another kind of cell. So now I should be able to just paste this guy in here. So now it's all just self-contained right here inside this function. So when I hit play now, it should work this time. We were registering it as a generic cell and using it as a custom cell. So there's our blah woot alternating thing. Make some sense?
Yes.
Okay, now you've used GitHub before, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll push this project up to GitHub, and then I'll send you a link to the GitHub. That way you can pull it and mess with it if you want, or see the sample code. And then I'll also send you a link. I'll put this video up on YouTube, and I'll send you a link to the video so you can reference back to it. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
What do you want me to accomplish for next time we meet?
Well, so I mean, in the ideal world, and it's really going to kind of be up to you as far as, you know, where you are in your other coursework in terms of getting caught up in this. But hopefully, I kind of gave you a crash course today where you can. And I don't know what Mr. Day is telling you need to do for homework, so I don't want to contradict that. But I mean, I think you probably have a good enough grasp now to create the screen that has that collection view with, you know, the custom cells on it, that at least gives them that initial list of you know, options or something like that. So, you know, maybe, yeah, so maybe kind of start creating that first screen. It doesn't necessarily have to be done, but, you know, let's start putting together those screens in your app under like some sort of official, you know, app code base that we can put on GitHub and be able to look at. Does it sound like a reasonable plan?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, so feel free to email me if you have any issues in between now and next week. Don't wait till next week. You know, email me so I can get you over those humps, and, you know, we can be as efficient as possible. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I will see you same time, same station next week.
Yep.
All right.
right.
Bye-bye.
See you then.